The translation you're probably most familiar is, "Blessed are those." Jerry talked to me afterwards and said, "Did you realize that in the Pew Bibles it says happy?" And somehow that idea of being happy didn't quite mesh with her understanding of that. But as I heard you read the scripture this morning and hearing happy, I thought, it brings out the contrast even more for us. So do what you want with that. Okay? And I don't want to hear it. Other than that. So a few years back, William Willimon started his sermon on this passage to a university crowd, Duke University, this way. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, the hungry, the persecuted. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. Theirs." So if your studies are going well, if you know all your German verbs are up on your organic chemistry, just received your acceptance to your first choice of law school, if you drink but only moderately, if you are loved by someone dearly but safely, and can recite the Apostles' Creed by heart and believe it and are certain of the Christian thing to do in Syria and Iran, and know where you'll be this time next year, you can leave now. This sermon, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, or mine here in this church, is not for you. Please leave quietly by the side aisles, for Jesus says quite simply that the kingdom of heaven is only for the poor in spirit. He's right. He's right. Kurt Vonnegut wrote an article, an essay in 2004. And he makes the point that Christians have often demanded that the Ten Commandments be posted on public buildings, but never the Beatitudes. Think about that. He says, "Blessed are the merciful in the courtroom. Blessed are the peacemakers in the Pentagon." Give me a break, he says. That's something I never thought before. It's a good question. Why is there so much passion on putting the Ten Commandments in places and not the Beatitudes? What's that say? Think about it. It's a great question. Now, I don't particularly want the Ten Commandments displayed in public places. I never have. And why would I? They are not the essence of the Christian faith. I thought about it. Look around this place, wherever you go. Nowhere in this place will you see the Ten Commandments posted. And we could do it without fear of litigation. Right? But we don't. We don't. I don't remember of ever being in a church anywhere who had the Ten Commandments posted. Maybe there are some. Or one. On the other hand, I've seen small needlepoint works of the Beatitudes and the fruits of the spirits in many churches. Probably the works of love by the poor in spirit. Probably left up for fear of hurting someone's feelings. That's how the church works. Now, if we understand this passage at all, then we understand that it is the Beatitudes which are the essence of the Christian faith in the kingdom of heaven. That's why Jesus begins his ministry by sharing with his disciples and the crowds the Beatitudes. He is saying, here are the kingdom values. This is the direction I am going, and if you're going to follow me, you need to get on board with this. We get so close to the truth sometimes, but we just simply miss it. I hadn't planned on sharing this, but I did in the first service, so I'll give you your money's worth in the second service. I recently did a wedding for Rochelle's oldest daughter. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so it went great. It's a nice service, nice day. And I filled out paperwork. Then I found out last week, it was probably Tuesday or Wednesday, got a call from Jessica. She said, "When you signed my license, you put 2016. And I won't tell you how I responded, but I was sort of laughing about that and talking with Rochelle about that, and she said, you know, you only had one job. We get so close and yet we miss it. It's a young preacher who was asked by a local funeral director to do a graveside of someone who had no family and no friends. He agreed, and as he tried to find the cemetery, he kind of got lost, and so he was about a half an hour late. Eventually, when he got there, he saw the backhoe and he saw the crew, but the hearse was nowhere to be found, and the workmen were off to the side eating their lunch. And so he went over to the open grave and he found that the vault lid had already been placed on. So taking out his book, he went through the funeral service, and feeling a bit guilty about being tardy, he gave an impassionate and lengthy sermon, sending the deceased into the great beyond in style. He was finished. There was no one there except the workers who were eating. And so he turned and walked to his car, and he overheard one of the workers say, you know, in my 20 years of installing septic tanks, I've never seen anything like this. We get so close, and we miss it. We get so close to the kingdom, and we miss it. A Canadian pastor said, Beatitudes are personal, deeply personal, and they are that too. She said, the last time this passage came around in the lectionary, I had to announce to the congregation that two of the very active people in our congregation, a man and his son, had died in a skiing accident. Then we read, blessed are those who mourn, and we were all mourning. My daughter was thrust into poverty when her husband was killed in an auto accident, she and a small child. All of a sudden, they were the poor. The Beatitudes are emotional and powerful. They are both profoundly true and utterly ludicrous. We know they are true, yet it is hard for us to live with these values. Sometimes it's even hard for us to accept these values. We say, oh yeah, these are great values, that's the way we should live, but that's not the way the world works. Right? So they're not real, they're not realistic. It's hard. It's hard. 12-step programs begin in exactly the same way Jesus began, in the spirit of poverty. I admit I am powerless over whatever addiction or problem, and my life has become unmanageable. I have come to believe that only a higher power, read God, can restore me. That's poverty of spirit. That's where they began. That's where Jesus began. Jack Dean Kingsbury writes about the Beatitudes. Writes, the poor in spirit are disciples who are not only economically deprived, but also who stand before God with no illusion of righteousness or self-sufficiency. Those who mourn are disciples who grieve over sin and evil in the world. The meek are disciples who are lowly and powerless, whose only hope is in God. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are disciples who yearn for the final salvation that only God gives. The merciful are disciples who eschew judgment and instead forgive. The pure in heart are disciples who are undivided in their allegiance to God. The peacemakers are disciples who work for the wholeness and well-being that God wills for a broken world. Those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake are disciples who incur tribulation precisely because they serve God. What Jesus promises all these disciples is fundamentally the same benefit, the salvation that attends God's kingdom. Shoshana Zuboff was the first one of her family to graduate from high school and then college and grad school. And when she finally was awarded tenure in an endowed chair at Harvard Business School, she was excited to tell her dad about it. He said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Is the chair comfortable?" She went on to find that it wasn't always comfortable. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Scott Peck wrote The Road Less Traveled. You may have read it. He tells of friends saying to him, "That was so clever of you to disguise your Christianity in The Road Less Traveled in order to get the Christian message across to people." He said, I didn't hide a Christian message. I wasn't a Christian when I wrote it. He went on to say that he did become a Christian later on. One of the inner events of my journey, he said, occurred around age 30 when I read the Screwtape Letters. It's about a demon and his nephew, and their task is to try and keep a young man from becoming a Christian. Somehow they blunder and he becomes Christian, and so now what do? Well, at some point, Screwtape advises Wormwood to make sure that this man regards his time as his time. He said, the sentence at first made no sense to me. I read it 3 times. I wondered if there might be some typographical error. How else could anybody else think of his time except as his own time? Then it dawned on me that the possibility existed my time belonged to a higher power than myself. For a good while, it was most discomforting notion. And still today, I'm continuing to learn to submit my time to God's ownership. The Beatitudes are discomforting, disconcerting. If you didn't hear that when they were read, you didn't hear it right. And they're discomforting, disconcerting, precisely because they're true. Precisely because they're true. And we know our world does not believe they're true. So we find ourselves torn. Words of faith we know are true. Yet a world that says every one of those are false. We are torn. Dietrich Bonhoeffer in The Cost of Discipleship said, having reached the end of the Beatitudes, we naturally ask if there is any place on earth for the community which they describe. And he says, the community which is the subject of Beatitudes is the community of the crucified. Think about that. The community of the crucified. How many of you have said to your friends and neighbors, come to my church, we're the church of the crucified? No, we said, oh, we got this great program, you'll like this, we got great cocktail, we have great treats. How many of you have thought of yourselves as being a part of the church of the crucified together? Powerful stuff. John Deere, and no, not that John Deere, in the summer of 1982, talks about visiting Israel. He wrote, I visited the Holy Land to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. On the day I left the United States, Israel invaded Lebanon. When I stepped off the plane in Jerusalem, soldiers carrying machine guns searched me. I had unwittingly walked into a full-scale war. He said, while in Israel, I visited the Chapel of the Beautitudes, a small 8-sided stone church that stands on a hill overlooking the sea. He said, I remember sitting there one afternoon, carefully reading those familiar words inscribed on the chapel walls. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are they who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of justice for Jesus. Love your enemies. Be as compassionate as God. He said, I walked out onto the balcony and surveyed the magnificent Sea of Galilee. It suddenly dawned on me, I think Jesus is serious. He said, I turned to the sky and called out to God, are you trying to tell me something? All right, he declared. I'll work for peace and justice for the rest of my life, but on one condition. You give me a sign. Don't ever do that. Immediately, 2 Israeli jets swooped down at me from the sea above the Sea of Galilee. They roared over me, causing a sonic boom. Moments later, they dropped bombs along the Lebanon border. Trembling, I made 2 decisions in that moment. I would devote the rest of my life to working for peace and justice. I would never ask God for another sign. I think Jesus is serious. Tom Long says, I heard about a woman who spent her life educating brain-damaged children. Now, if there's any group of people whom the world rejects more than brain-damaged children, I don't know who they might be. But we say nice things about them, but we keep them at a distance. This woman spent her whole career working with these children, so much so that her values were transformed. One year, she decided to have her class put on a production of My Fair Lady. It never occurred to her not to give the lead part to a girl whose motor system had been damaged to the point where she was confined to a wheelchair. It never occurred to her not to give her the part. It also never occurred to her that on the night when the curtain opened, and that first performance, that girl wheeled herself in and began to sing, I could have danced all night. Could have danced all night. And it never occurred to her that there would be weeping. Maybe Jesus was serious. Maybe he was serious. Now, when you hear Matthew 5, when you think about the Beatitudes, the blesseds, and you think, yeah, they're beautiful. They're moving, they're lovely. They're needlepoint worthy. If you think those things, if you feel those things, you got it wrong. Not only got it wrong, but you got it terribly wrong. These Beatitudes are radical, challenging, in your face. They call into question the way we live our lives. There isn't a part of your life that shouldn't be confronted by the kingdom of God values. Period. This is where your Christian faith gets real. There isn't a part of your life that shouldn't be confronted by the kingdom of God values. Not your wallet, not your free time, not your friends, not your prayers, not your politics. All of those things are confronted by and challenged by the values and ways of Jesus and God's kingdom. We have a choice. Jesus says to those disciples as he begins his journey, as they are deciding whether or not they shall follow him, he says to them, these are the kingdom values. Are you ready to accept them? Are you ready to live them? That's still a question for us. This isn't just a sweet little beautiful passage. But it's one that finds its heart in our very lives. That each choice we make, each step we take, will we follow Jesus or not? And the only way to follow Jesus